So right now I have what we think is the strongest election integrity measures in the country. I'm actually going to sign it right here. It's going to take effect. So there you go. Bill is signed.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed sweeping new voting restrictions into law this morning live on Fox News. The network billed it as an exclusive. They were the only media allowed in the room. DeSantis, as you just saw, hailed the new law as necessary to curb what he calls voter fraud, despite little evidence of actual voter fraud in Florida. And Florida isn't alone. There are also protests today in Texas, where voting access is already highly restricted. And yet state lawmakers there are considering two new bills that would restrict voting even more. In fact, Republican lawmakers across the country are pushing new voting restrictions. 361 restrictive bills have been introduced in 47 states since the 2020 election. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Sam Brock, who's in Miami, and NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson, who is in Austin. So, Priscilla, let's start with you. What's happening where you are in Texas, where these two new bills are now under consideration?
Right. Well, the House was expected to be talking about House Bill 6, that restrictive voting bill today. But I will tell you, while it was first on the docket this morning, they have not gotten to it yet. They have been discussing some other things, wrapping up some things from yesterday, and then they adjourned for lunch. And so sources tell us this could mean that there are some conversations going on behind the scenes, perhaps some deal making on those more than 100 amendments that Democrats are proposing to this bill, which, as you can imagine, would have taken hours to get through, and we're now into the afternoon. And again, this bill has not yet been brought up into the conversation. But even so, there are those demonstrators, those voting rights advocates who showed up today to give a physical show of their opposition to this bill. They have been sitting in that chamber gallery all day as lawmakers have been working their way through these other bills and measures, and they are waiting for that bill to come up. They want to see what lawmakers are going to do, what amendments are going to be accepted, and really how things will turn out here. Jeff?
And Sam, that Ron DeSantis event today was clearly designed for a Fox News constituency. But talk to us about these new voting restrictions that are now law in Florida. What changes are in store for Florida voters, and what's been the reaction so far?
Jeff, good question. Good afternoon. I'm glad to be with you. Just as a general backdrop here, the Republican-controlled legislature commissioned a survey of all the 67 election supervisors in the 67 counties all over the state and asked them, what kind of examples of voter fraud have you seen in recent years? What kind of problems have you encountered? All of them, or at least all of the ones that responded, which was the vast majority, said, nope, no issues, no voter fraud, we're good. So what happens? A complete overhaul of voting laws in the state of Florida that was signed into law by Governor DeSantis today in a bizarre sort of exclusive Fox News setting. That was at 8:45 this morning. You're seeing a list on your screen right now of some of the components of this controversial law, Jeff. It limits the use of drop boxes, adds more ID requirements for people requesting absentee ballots, requires voters to renew absentee ballot requests previously. That would just go straight through 2 straight election cycles, and expands the rule limiting outside groups from providing items with the intent to influence voters near poll sites. That could conceivably include food and water, Jeff. A few hours ago, Governor DeSantis did hold a press conference. Here's what he said.
Some of this stuff that was going on in other parts of the country, where you'd have these big private groups come in and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to run elections, that is unacceptable. We are not allowing that in Florida. We're going to make sure our elections are transparent and they're not being funded by special interests. We're also going to continue with voter ID, which is very, very important to make sure that you are who you say you are.
And for years, Republicans in this state, they were the party that was using voting by mail more. That got flipped on its face in 2020 with the pandemic, when with President Trump trying to discredit the authenticity and legitimacy of voting by mail. Jeff?
Yeah, and federal election officials say the 2020 election was the most secure election in U.S. history, and yet you have 47 out of 50 states pushing various forms of voter suppression. Sam Brock and Priscilla Thompson, my thanks to the both of you.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.